Thank you for joining me for the 11th episode of the Doc Talk with Liz podcast. Our guest star today is Dr. Josh Mugel. Dr. Mugel is an emergency medicine physician at Northeast Georgia Medical Center. He obtained his medical degree from the University of Michigan, did his residency in emergency medicine at University of Indiana, and completed a fellowship in disaster medicine. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us today, Doctor. Today we have Dr. Josh Mugel on. He is an emergency medicine physician, and I just want to thank you so much for joining us for this interview today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. So you're in emergency medicine right now, but before we go into what exactly you do as an emergency medicine physician, I was hoping that you could tell us a little bit about your journey to emergency medicine. Is this something that you've always wanted to do from a young age, or did you kind of do a few different things before?
Well, emergency medicine is the specialty that I chose only in medical school. And my journey to medical school was a little bit different than most people. So I wanted to be a doctor when I was younger. I think I had a lot of expectations from my family and religious expectations tied up in medicine. And so when I was in undergrad, I was a pre-med, and I had this big motivation to go into medicine and do important work. But for personal reasons and for kind of this long and arduous journey, I actually switched out of pre-med while I was an undergrad. Wanted to be a writer for a while, and then I got married, and my wife got pregnant, and we had some kids. And so I actually ended up in a whole different career in software for about 8 years before I went into medicine. And I really didn't enjoy it. I was uninspired. I was felt like I wasn't doing a lot of important work in life, and I was very, very bored more than anything. And then I had done a software startup company out in California during the time. And so when it failed, which a lot of startups do, and I was broke and I had 2 kids, I felt like I had to do something more stable with my life and that earned more money, but also that they gave me an opportunity to go back and do something a little bit more meaningful. So that's why I went back to medical school. So I actually didn't start medical school until I was 32.
Oh.
And so I graduated. I had to go back and I had to restudy for all of the MCAT and all of the different things, the requirements to get into medicine. And so I started medical school at 32, and that's when I kind of learned about all the different specialties and learned about emergency medicine, and decided that was kind of the specialty for me. And I actually chose emergency medicine because I think people choose their specialties based on personality a lot. And, some specialties are very kind of nerdy or very thoughtful or very, contemplative. People who go into emergency medicine are the ones who tend to be either kind of adrenaline seekers or easily bored, and I'm kind of more the easily bored type. So I like a lot of variety. I wanted to see different things, more and more. I always wanted to be challenged during my career, and it was something that I could do that was directly meaningful and do something with patients. So I chose emergency medicine, did my residency in that, and I actually did a fellowship in disaster medicine. So I actually have a little bit of subspecialty expertise in responding to disasters. So that's my kind of subspecialty there.
Interesting. So if I can also ask this, going off the things that you kind of did before entering medical school, how do you think that they kind of shaped your thinking when you were in medical school, or even shape your thinking now with like software startups and all of these things?
Yeah, so I don't think necessarily, I'm applying any of my software skills to medicine,
Right.
But there's a lot about the corporate world and kind of just being in a job, and going to work and designing a product and taking it to market and all that kind of stuff. That has been kind of applicable to my job now, to emergency medicine and some of the leadership roles I've been in. And I think it's pretty obvious when you see doctors who have gone straight from undergrad to medical school to residency to being a doctor without necessarily having any real world work experience, and kind of some of the frustrations they have with having to go to meetings, or how to run a committee, or how to respond professionally to emails, or how to, just kind of all the job stuff around, how to be good at a job, and how to work with other people, and how to have a boss and stuff like that, is actually, it's a skill that you have to learn. If you don't have any practice at it, people struggle with it. I've seen people burn out of medicine because they're like, oh my gosh, I have to, talk to insurance companies, or I have to bill, or I have to do all these other things that are kind of the non-patient care parts of the job. And for me, that's just kind of part of a job, and you just have to do it. And, that's the bad part of a job. And it's not interesting, and but it's a lot better than working in a cubicle in a software company. So I think that was a large part of what I took from that previous career into medicine. And there's also just a lot of ancillary skills that, when you're a doctor, you have to serve on committees. When you're a doctor, you have to take leadership roles. You have to teach people. And so all that kind of other stuff about being a doctor, like public speaking, or speaking in front of audiences, or writing, professional writing is a skill that not very many people do well. And all that stuff was stuff that I think I learned in software. But then also I've had a lot of experience in my career building new programs, so building training programs, or building fellowships, or building residencies. And being able to kind of have that entrepreneurial spirit was something I definitely took from software. So being able to find the funds to do something, to get the right backers for it, to be able to go up and say, this is what this community needs, and they don't have it now. How are we going to pull together the different pieces to make it happen? So right. Just kind of all that ancillary work from running businesses and starting businesses.
Yeah, definitely. And like, if there are people maybe listening that want to go straight from undergrad into medical school, do you have tips for them on how maybe they can learn those skills, like without going into, like work experience outside of medicine? Or would you have?
Well, I think even small part-time jobs are important. I really do think, having real world work experience is important.
Yeah.
And so I do. I think, even in undergrad, if you, just working for a little bit as a job, and having to work with the general public, or working with, colleagues, and being able to collaborate on teams is important. But even if people don't have that, finding other activities where you do have to have develop a lot of those skills. So whether it's research projects that you get on, and you have to work under a research mentor, or work with, alongside other researchers, or working for a nonprofit, or, doing some charitable work where you are not the only person that's directly involved. And so just having a little bit of diversity of experience, I think is pretty helpful. Just having any sort of real world experience is helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And then I kind of wanted to go back. So you said when you were in undergrad, you started off like as a pre-med. What were you majoring in?
I was double majoring in chemistry and biology.
Oh, wow.
And I finished my chemistry major, but I switched out my biology major to English Lit. So I ended up doubling in chemistry and English Lit.
Wow, what a combination. Yeah.
And I actually went to grad school for creative writing for a bit. I never graduated. I didn't get my master's, but I did a year in grad school for creative writing too.
Oh, nice. Interesting. Okay. So again, like you didn't go straight to medical school, you went to like the software startup company. So had you already taken the classes like for the content that was tested on the MCAT by that time, since you had
I did.
Okay.
I did. So because of my chemistry major, I'd done all the prerequisites for medical school, which include like, I think it's 8 semester hours of chemistry and physics and biology. And I had already done that. However, a lot of medical schools had a time limit on the prerequisites that you had to do. You had to have done them within 5 years or something like that, which I hadn't done. So I wasn't allowed to apply to some medical schools because of the age of my prerequisites. But then also just studying for the MCAT, my knowledge was rusty. So I just had to restudy all over again. I remember when I decided I wanted to go to medical school, just buying textbooks and reading them cover to cover. So I bought a physics textbook and read it cover to cover, and I bought a chemistry textbook and read it. Yeah, so I put in the work. I put in the work to get it done, and basically probably did a master's worth of work on my own, just studying for the MCAT.
Wow, gotcha. So do you think that like you're a person that learns best by reading or by like listening to videos or what?
It's all sorts of different things, and I think it depends on the content. So conceptual things like physics, physics is in organic chemistry a very conceptual
Right.
kind of concepts, and I do really well at those because I don't know, that appeals to me the most. And so just kind of once I can get the basic concepts by reading, and then just doing some problem solving, I solve that very well. Unfortunately, I actually struggled a little bit in medical school because medical school is not super conceptually based. It's very, very much fact based, kind of rote memorization. And so medicine is just about absorbing a vast amount of knowledge, and there is some concept in it, the pathophysiology, the biochemistry of the cells and things like that, and so there is some of that, but the bulk of medical school is just pure learning content, and there is no trick to that. It's just repetition, and nobody does it better than anybody else, to some degree. And so basically the people who do well in medical school are the people who put in the time. And so medical school is all about how hard you're willing to work or how hard, how many hours you have in the day. And so it really is brutal just because you just have to grind it out.
Yeah, definitely. So you also said that like for people that go into emergency medicine, there are kind of like two general ways that you might categorize them as like people that really like an adrenaline rush versus people that are more easily bored. And you said that you put yourself in the easily bored category. So I'm guessing that like you aren't a person that would go like skydiving or something, or would you?
Oh, I love skydiving. Yeah.
Oh.
So skydiving. Yeah. I mean, I do a little bit of the adrenaline stuff.
Okay.
I don't think I need that in my life.
Oh, okay.
But I do think I like a variety of experiences, and so I like moving. So I've lived in a lot of different places in this country and other countries. I like mixing up my friendships. I like trying different foods. I like trying different experiences. There's some doctors who see the same disease process all the time. A heart failure cardiologist will see only heart failure. There's one disease process the rest of his or her life. And I would die if I had to do that. So I hate the concept of thinking in 20 years I can tell you exactly where I'll be on a Thursday afternoon. It's like, okay, I'll be in a clinic on Thursday afternoon seeing heart failure patients 20 years from now. I just couldn't do that. Couldn't do that. So I don't want to know. I don't want to have any predictability to what's coming from my future. I always want to kind of be surprised by life.
Okay.
And I think that motivates and drives me quite a bit.
Yeah,
which is funny because one time when I was interviewing for residency at this one program, so after med school you have to interview for residencies at all these different programs, and I was a good student, and I expected to get into a good residency. Somebody asked me, one of the interviewers asked me what my biggest fear in life was, and I said, and I had this whole standard answer. I said, my biggest fear in life is becoming bored. I want to try new things. I want to do new experiences. I always want to, find something interesting and intriguing about life to challenge me. And she just shook her head at me and she goes, I can't imagine anybody becoming bored with this beautiful world. And so I was like, wow, okay, I guess I'm failing this interview. I guess we'll both agree that I'm not coming here for residency. So it kind of shut down conversation pretty quickly.
Gotcha. So kind of like going off of that, seeing different things. I follow you on Twitter, so I know that you like have some like different cases, like different cases, like depending on the shift that you're working. Do you have like a most interesting case? I mean, there are so many that I'm sure that you've seen that it's hard to choose, but like any that like stick out in your mind?
I'm pausing because I'll tell you. Let me kind of explain about emergency medicine a little bit, and then I'll tell you why I'm pausing. And I can maybe think of a story, but so first of all, emergency medicine is an all-comers specialty. So anybody who walks through our doors, we're mandated by law to see, and so it could be the most interesting things. We see trauma, we see cardiac arrest, we see strokes and heart attacks and pediatric illnesses, and right now we're seeing a ton of COVID, and so we literally see all sorts of patients walk through our door.
Right.
In addition to that, we're kind of the safety net for American healthcare, and so anybody, we see all spectrum of society, right. Including the people who are the outcasts of society, the least desirable people for other patients or for other doctors to care for. And so I think we take a lot of pride in saying that we're going to care for everybody, whether it's people with schizophrenia or people with homelessness, or mental illness, or just extreme poverty, or a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And so we do see this crazy stories in the emergency department, and so we'll see patients with wounds on their legs that have been going on for months and they have maggots in them, or we'll see people with these horrible traumas that you get to the backstory and there's crazy things that went on that led up to somebody being shot, or running over somebody else with a lawnmower, which I've seen before, things like that. Yeah. So I mean, the stories are crazy. It's hard for me to answer that question honestly, because and it's a very common question. People say, oh, you're an ER doc, you see everything. What's your craziest story? Which I understand. There's a little bit of interest and excitement there, but honestly, we see a lot of very, very sad stuff. A lot of very, very hard and tragic stuff in the emergency department. And so it's easy for me to kind of come up with some weird sex stories that happen to people, or kind of things I've seen in people's vaginas or butts, or things like that.
Yeah.
But honestly, the bulk of the stories we see where there's these horrifying things going on are very, very sad and tragic, and so it's kind of hard to come up with a story that meets people's interest and sounds exciting, but it doesn't horribly relive somebody's trauma. And so I kind of tend not to give a solid answer to that question, like I'm not doing with you right now, just for that reason. It's not a it is exciting for us, and it's it's fascinating, the things we see, but it's not really a way to relive it. You know what I mean?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. That makes sense for sure. And then also backtracking a little bit again, because you were talking about how like in life you like a variety of experiences, and again, like on your Twitter sometimes I see like these recipes that you cook and this food and it looks amazing. So I'm wondering if you have a favorite food.
Well, okay, so people ask, so that's a good question. I don't have favorites, and I think the reason, again, because I love variety. And so if you ask me what my favorite thing is, I'll say, well, right now I really tried this thing that I really liked, but 2 weeks from now I'm going to get real tired of that and I'm going to want to try something else. And so I really love trying different things. I love trying different recipes. I make a really good tortilla soup, kind of traditional Mexican tortilla soup. I make some really good pies. I make some really good cookies, but I kind of get bored of making one thing, and so I'll try the next thing. So I probably haven't spent a lot of time perfecting anything, enough to be able to say this is my favorite or this isn't. So I go on these little random kicks, and it's like, oh, okay, like last summer I was really into pastries and I was trying to perfect my pastry crust, and I was making real good pastries. This year I've been working on cocktails. So that's what I'm working on right now, is making different cocktails, trying, experimenting with different liquors and different flavors and stuff like that. And when I go to restaurants, I just want to be surprised, and I'll often just go into a restaurant and I'll just tell the server to let the chef pick for me.
Wow. Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I just want to be surprised. I just want to.
That sounds kind of scary.
Oh no, it's fun. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. You just have to be open. You just have to be open to it.
That's true.
And you do. And sometimes, you might have preferred something else, that was on the menu or something, but it's an adventure.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And actually, I think like you mentioned, like sometimes you like trying different things. You've been baking some cookies lately for some fellow kind of colleagues in the emergency room. So I'm wondering what is kind of like the secret to your cookies.
Okay, I will tell you. But I don't take credit for this. I'm not creative
Okay.
enough to kind of come up with this on my own. I've learned from cookbooks.
Okay.
But yeah, so I started making cookies because, well, first of all, I started when I was a resident because um, when you're a resident, you're still a learner, and the nurses are a little bit mean to you sometimes, and so you have to bake cookies to make people be nice to you.
Oh, I see.
And so I would start baking cookies for these shifts where, especially night shifts, where they're hard and they're busy and everybody's grouchy. Or if you have to call a specialist in, like, you see this horrible eye trauma and you have to call an ophthalmologist in, or a hand trauma, you have to call a hand surgeon in. And nobody wants to be called in at 3 a.m. So it helps to have cookies, so that's where this tradition started. So every night shift, I like to bake cookies. And it's a little bit of a meditative process too, as you're preparing for your night shift, and you have to go in at like 10 p.m. and it's 4 p.m. and so just kind of sitting there and working with the dough with your hands and rolling out the little cookie mounds and everything like that is kind of interesting. But I got this new cookie book from a couple years ago by Mindy Siegel, and it's called Cookie Love, and it's a very, very good cookie book. And what she has taught me, two keys to making cookies. The first is, when you are creaming your butter and your sugar, you have to do it for a long time, for about 4 minutes. So you have to cream it on high speed, those two together, before you do anything else, for about 4 minutes. And it makes the dough very light and fluffy. And the second key, and this is tricky, is to use unsalted butter for making the cookies, and then to add different kinds of salt to replace what the butter would already have. So she calls for like sea salt, or kosher salt, all these different kinds of things, and extra salt. So it adds a little something extra to the flavors. And so
Interesting.
that's what I like to do. Yeah. And I like to experiment with flavors, and some of her recipes call for orange water, so I'll try different citrus flavors or different other things. And I just like trying new things, and I like using my nurses as my experimenters. So they always say all my cookies are good, but some of them go a lot faster than others. So I'm like, okay, those are the good ones. Those are the other, the not so good ones.
Gotcha. Yeah, definitely. I'll have to look into that book. I like baking myself too, so I might have to look into that and try it sometime. I don't know.
Yeah, baking cookies is lots of fun.
Yeah, definitely. So I also wanted to touch on something that you said about with the emergency room kind of stories, and how you guys treat everybody, right? Like people that society might see as outcasts, or they kind of put them on a different platform maybe. So I was just wondering how you think people just in general can kind of help those people more, kind of help empowering them, with them, not just giving them these things, but walking alongside them, so that they're not seen as outcasts, ways that we can be more inclusive.
Sure. That's a good question to ask. I unfortunately don't think the question is answerable from an individual perspective. And so what we'll have is, for example, and okay, here's a good story. You wanted to hear a story. Here's my good story. I used to have a patient who would come in into my emergency department at a different hospital I used to work at in a different city. And he was a homeless guy with schizophrenia. And he was, actually a real nice guy. He just kind of would have a few occasional violent outbursts, which got him in trouble with the law a few times. And he didn't really have his life together enough that he could, maintain a full-time home and seek out and maintain his medical care in a way that kept him out of the emergency department properly. Right. So he would actually come in daily, every single day at night. He would wander around the city, and one of his stops was in the emergency department. And he had some, he walked a lot, so he actually had bad knees. He was, a little bit older, and and he had, just, a little bit of swelling in his legs. So he'd always ask me about his legs. And so I'd sit and talk with him. And, we talk about his legs. We talk about his knees, and we give him a little bit of ibuprofen, and he always wanted some coffee. So I'd give him some coffee. And actually, so I was at that emergency department for about 10 years. And when I left, he was such a regular, and we were such good friends that we actually, a few months before I ended up leaving that emergency department, I ended up throwing him a birthday.
Wow.
And I think a lot of a lot of doctors, get frustrated with that kind of patient because they're like, oh, this isn't why I went into emergency medicine. There's no emergency here. Let's, I'm angry with him. I want to throw him out. I want to, not have him in here and everything like that. And so I fooled all of my colleagues, and I told them that we're having a pitch-in for somebody's birthday, but I didn't say it was a patient. And so everybody brought in a little bit, these fancy dishes and everything like that. And then it was for this patient, and we ended up, he had a regular room in room 19 that we would always put him in. And so we actually strung up some streamers and bought him a cake and put some, the nurses got him a card and pitched in and everything like that. And so we all sang happy birthday to him and gave him a very fancy pitch-in, which I think annoyed some of my partners, but made him really, really happy. And it was a good memory. But back to your question, how do we walk alongside those people? Individually, I mean, these are humans just like you or me. And, I think just, acknowledging their humanity is the most important thing we can do on an individual level. But honestly, the most important thing we can do for those people themselves is to advocate for better policies and better healthcare systems. And so this is not a, thing that you can fix or I can fix or, anybody else can fix by being nicer to, these individuals. These are things that we need to be loud about and be strong advocates for, and to, elect people for, and to, discuss with our policymakers, and to, these are government decisions, these are policy decisions. And, our healthcare system is a really, really bad healthcare system. And we don't take care of the most vulnerable people well. And in parallel, our housing system is bad, and our criminal justice system is bad, and the way we take care of people with mental health issues is bad, and the way we our drug policies are bad. And so those things all kind of tie in together. And what's needed is a more comprehensive and more humanistic look at the way we deal with people who are less fortunate in this country, and how we deal with that. And so that's a policy issue, that's a national conversation issue, that's a government issue. And so I think the best thing I would recommend to people is to be aware of those things, and to constantly and loudly be advocating for people who don't have that voice to advocate for themselves.
Yeah, that's I think that's like probably spot on, exactly, because like each of us want to probably like make a difference individually, but in order to really make the biggest difference, you have to have people like coming together to like working on something.
And honestly, the people who make the biggest difference aren't people who, go volunteer at a clinic, which, is important and fine, and it makes us feel good. But the best thing that especially, undergrads or people, who are kind of developing their career can do is to go into fields where they do have an impact, whether it's policy or public health or law, but to go into those fields where they can have a louder voice, and then to actually use that voice once they're in that position to do so, to advocate for people who need advocating for.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. Yeah, thank you for your response on that. I think that's like such a good answer, kind of, and like something that I hope that I can also incorporate into the career that I go into in the future, like regardless of necessarily like the field, that I can still be like kind of a voice for the voiceless in a way, I guess. So yeah.
I mean, I think that's what people need. Now, people go into careers for all sorts of different reasons, and people need money, people need stability, people go into careers that interest them, or inspire their creativity. And so I'm not here to judge anybody's choice, but if you're looking to make a difference, then there are careers where you can make a more impactful difference, more directly on people through these means. And there are people who need it.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the first part of this podcast interview, we learned that Dr. Mugel started medical school when he was 32 after working at a software startup company. Real-world work experience is extremely important. Learn how to work under and alongside people and seek out diverse experiences. The most important thing we can do for those who are considered outcast by society is to advocate for better policies. Dr. Mugel likes a variety of experiences and doesn't want predictability for the future. He prefers to be surprised. His tradition of baking cookies starts as a resident working the night shift. He got a book called Cookie Love that taught him the secret to making great cookies. The people who make the biggest difference are those who go into fields where they can have a louder voice and use that voice to advocate for people. So, you mentioned that you've lived in a lot of places, like going on with the variety that you like. And you said like in different countries as well as in the United States. Can you give me some examples of places that you've lived in, maybe?
Um, so I've lived in a lot of different places in the U.S. I was born in California. My parents were actually missionaries, and I lived in southern Mexico, in the state of Oaxaca for a number of years growing up. And then in Texas and back in California for my work. I've lived in Indiana and in Michigan, and now I'm in Georgia. But I've also done a little bit of global health work during my career, and so I've traveled a lot and taught a lot of different countries. But then I worked in Liberia during the Ebola epidemic for a while. And I've done a tiny bit of work in Kathmandu, Nepal, on their disaster response systems too.
I see. So, again, like going off of the fact that you had like different careers and stuff also before going into medicine, how did like living in those different places and maybe even experiencing those cultures, do you think that also plays a role in like how you kind of interact with people that come into the ER? And yeah.
Sure. I mean, I think everybody's background informs how they, interact with people. And this kind of goes back to does having a different job, inform how your career in medicine goes. And so I think, if you work before medical school, if you want to go into medicine and you work for medical school as a server or as a bartender, that really helps you be a doctor, because you're dealing with the chaos, you're dealing with, demanding customers, unsatisfied customers, and that really informs how you are going to see medicine, because in medicine, we have a lot of demanding and unsatisfied patients.
Right.
Similarly, if you live amongst a variety of people and hear a variety of stories and are exposed to people who don't necessarily live with a lot of luxury in their life, who are very impoverished, essentially, then I think when you're a physician, you understand a lot of how your health is affected by your necessities in life. So if you're a very, very poor person, or if you're working minimum wage jobs and don't have any sort of health insurance, or you don't have any paid sick time, you can understand how a person in that situation might let their health go for a while, or might not get their insulin filled, or might have trouble understanding doctors' instructions. And so I think it gives you a little bit of more awareness of, essentially it's the field that we call it in medicine is the social determinants of health, how people's life situation affects their health outcomes. And, I think it's something theoretically everybody should be aware of or could be aware of, but I think you internalize it a lot more if you've lived it or lived among people like that, or had to struggle for paycheck to paycheck in your own life, or ever had to be on WIC or on, food stamps or anything like that. You kind of understand some of the decisions that you had to make. And I think you can be a little bit more empathetic and understanding of your patients in those situations.
Yeah, definitely. And, like going off of this, discussing like the things that you currently do and your experience with emergency medicine, and again, like with social determinants of health, do you think that you would have any specific pieces of advice for people that want to go into emergency medicine, or like even to the medical field in general? Like, I know that you've kind of given us some throughout this, but do you have specific ones that really stick out to you?
I really, especially emergency medicine, would tell people. And so I'm also, we haven't really covered this, but I'm also a residency program director, which means I'm in charge of teaching residents, so teaching people who graduated medical school, and who are going, you're training to become emergency doctors. And so I'm in
Right.
charge of recruiting them and training them. And so I actually do have a lot of exposure into all of the different applications that come across my desk. And, I have a little bit of exposure to who makes a good emergency physician, or who makes a very empathetic emergency physician, and who doesn't. And the people that I seek out in this role tend to have a more interesting background. So they've done more interesting things, and they've volunteered, or they've done a lot of research, or they've built an app that does something cool, or they've just done interesting things in their life. And so I look for people like that. I look for people who have pursued some interest in their life, and they've shown me that they have this creativity and this passion and this want to do different things. And so that's kind of what I'm looking for, is like, people always think that they have to do some check boxes on their application. So I've got to volunteer this, or I've got to participate on a research project. And so they sign on to a research project and it checks a box, or I have to volunteer for this. So they sign on to a volunteer project and it checks a box. And I don't really care about those things. I don't care about if you have X number of months of research, or X number, hours of volunteering, or anything like that. That doesn't matter to me. What I want to see is that you have really done some deep dives on something interesting in your life, that I really am fascinated about how this disease process works. And so I did a research project on it, and I built an app that kind of, helped patients with that, or I worked in a clinic about it, or, something like that. So it's, it just kind of shows me that you're working in your mind on how to solve these problems, or that you've had challenges and you've overcome them. Like, you grew up in a first generation household and you had to pay for your own way for college. And so you worked your ass off during, undergrad. You did extra hours doing this, or it took you 6 years to do your undergrad because, you had to go back and forth between work and school, or help your family, or whatever it is. I want somebody who's lived life and who has an interesting experience, and who demonstrates passion, and who demonstrates creativity. And what that shows me is that person is going to take the same approach to taking care of their patients. They're going to be passionate about it. They're going to go all in. They're going to work hard for their patients, and they're going to look at things in a different way. They're going to approach it and say, hey, why do we keep doing this one thing in the emergency department for these patients? Because they keep coming back. So why don't I work on a program to help them, outside of the emergency department, or before they come into the emergency department, or do a research project that shows me why they're doing that, And so kind of they're going to be able to approach problems from a higher level, rather than just kind of, seeing and taking care of patients.
Awesome. That's definitely really interesting. Going off that you're like a residency program director, what are some challenges that you've maybe faced with that? Building up the residency program? Is it kind of like anything, or?
Yeah, I mean, there's always challenges. I think any sort of education is, it's got its issues, and there's a lot of internal kind of in the weeds stuff that I can talk about in terms of how we train residents. But I think generally speaking, one of the bigger challenges I've had is, and this kind of goes back to the theme that we've been talking about already, is working with residents and developing them as kind of holistic, and full form doctors, and giving feedback. And I think one of the bigger challenges that I've faced as a residency director is residents who don't take feedback well, and trying to develop these residents, because and I actually give a little lecture to people when they start residency, and I tell them, residency is different than medical school, and it's different than undergrad. And usually by the time you get to me in residency, you've kind of had your whole life somewhat laid out in front of you. You've done your elementary school, junior high, high school, college, and then medical school. And, there's a very steady progression of things that you have to do. And you have to get this test score to graduate, and you have to get this test score to get into the next level. And you're all very high performers, and you're all doing this. But like, residency is different. It's not about getting to the next step. It's not about getting to the next, test score. It's not about competing with your classmates. This is actually the first time where it's only about caring for patients, and it's about making you a better doctor so that you can better care for other people. And there is no competition here, and there is no, ultimate grade. The grade is, can you take care of a good, patient well, so that they don't die? and so that they get better. And so, and there's a whole job aspect to it too. You have to show up and work hard and, you know, be good to your colleagues and, you know, be on time and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think the mindset is very, very different for people when they have to make this change, and everybody gets feedback and everybody gets bad feedback sometimes too. And I think there's some people who respond to that very poorly, and they're used to being these high performers who've made it all the way through high school and undergrad and in med school, and they're perfect and everybody's loved them and everybody's giving them honors and awards and everything like that. And now I'm telling them, man, you gotta think differently about this thing, and you gotta work harder here, or you kind of talk bad to nurses this way, or you're kind of rude to patients, and we got to work on that, you know, or whatever it is. And I think some people have a real hard time making that adjustment and hearing those words.
Right. Yeah. I think that, like, in so many things, right, like even in different career fields, it's like people maybe they're trying to give like constructive criticism, but somebody's like takes it the wrong way because they're like, oh, I thought that was too fun.
It is. Yeah. Some people that first time they have a real, you know, hard case or here's some constructive feedback, some people crumble from it and some people get stronger for it. And then, you know, that's the other thing about medicine is, like, people are going to die. And sometimes people are going to die because you didn't do the right thing, or you didn't do the right thing fast enough, or you did the wrong thing, you know. And it's just like, you know, that's the unfortunate part about medicine. And if you can learn from that and realize that mistake or that bad outcome is your best teacher, then you'll become a much better doctor. But if you can't internalize that and you crumble from it, or you hear negative feedback and you don't want to listen to it, then you're not going to be a good doctor. You know, that's just kind of how it works.
Yeah, definitely. And going off of that as well, like the hardships that medicine can have for healthcare workers, like that are actually in this field and the things that they experience every day. I'm just kind of curious as to how you handle that. You know, like there are times when like maybe you dive deeper into your work and like you learn from these experiences, but then maybe times that like you just need to take some time off to like kind of relax and recharge. So like, what do you do too?
That's a good question. I'm probably not the greatest example. I probably throw myself into my work, you know, a little too much. And, you know, I like to drink, you know, so I drink after pretty much every shift. Not to an unhealthy amount or anything, but I do enjoy it. It's my time to myself. And then, you know, I enjoy the flavors and you know, all that kind of stuff. I think a lot of it is just kind of finding things outside of medicine that intrigue you and interest you, whether that's traveling or, you know, having a hobby or whatever. The main thing for me is I've really worked to kind of diversify my career a little bit so that I'm not just, you know, day in, day out seeing patients and taking care of patients in the emergency department. I do these other things. I do some disaster response and preparedness work. I do some education stuff. You know, I do a little bit of, you know, I have some leadership opportunities and whatnot. So I just, although a lot, it's different kinds of work, I'm constantly switching gears to, you know, I'm caring for patients and doing all this hard stuff in the emergency department, or I'm on this phone call with this disaster organization, or I'm doing some research over here, or I'm teaching residents and writing some curricula. And so it just kind of keeps my mind occupied in different ways. And I think it, you know, kind of lets me breathe a little bit, you know, from that perspective.
Yeah. And I was going to say, or like going to New York to help with the COVID.
Yeah, to get the New York help with COVID, right? That was hard. That was actually a really hard time. But no, I mean, honestly, the best thing anybody can do, and I know this sounds really, really basic, but it's exercise and sleep. So, I mean, if you can nail a good sleep regimen and a decent exercise regimen, that is, you know, a huge part of the battle for wellness and for not burning out, for dealing with emotional toil. I mean, and I actually teach residents. I give whole lectures on sleep hygiene and how to appropriately sleep for residency and stuff like that. So I know it sounds really, really basic, but honestly, it's so physiologic. The better you sleep and the more you exercise, the better you handle stress.
Yeah, definitely. I can imagine that like also going to like having to find like kind of a work-life balance could be challenging for some people, especially because like you were saying before, up to that point it's like you're going straight through school, right? And so like a lot of the time maybe you're like fully invested in this field, just trying to get from undergrad to medical school and like trying to satisfy all these requirements. And so sometimes people like don't take proper care of themselves because they're trying to meet everybody else's needs before their own. And so yeah.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, that is part of medicine, and I mean, some people
Right.
find ways to do it really well. Um, Unfortunately, some people struggle with that, and I think there's, probably, I have no idea what the statistics are, but I imagine there's a high rate of divorce in medicine,
Uh-huh.
and I know that there's a high rate of suicide compared to the general population in medicine. And I think it's something that we struggle with. We're all very high performers, and I think once we're confronted with a lot of the realities of medicine, or a lot of the just years and years and years of work, and the kind of emotional toil it takes, then yeah, I think it does affect the people around us, and it affects our mental health as well.
Yeah, and I'm actually kind of curious, again because I follow you on Twitter, and so sometimes I see some of your tweets, and I'm curious as to how COVID has also changed the dynamic within hospitals and like the kind of burden that it is having on like healthcare workers, and like maybe you can speak to that as a healthcare worker yourself.
Sure, it's terrible. It's awful. I mean, we're I mean, this interview is happening on August 27th, 2021. And it's probably the worst month we've ever had in the emergency
Really?
department and in
Wow.
COVID. Yeah, I mean, our numbers are terrible. Our patients are sicker, the hospital's fuller, and we've been doing this for a year and a half right now. So, um, and at this point it's preventable because the vaccine's out there, and people, there's so much misinformation and people unwilling to do the vaccine. So I think we're kind of just, speaking for everybody, everybody's just kind of at their end of the rope. And so we're seeing a lot of our nursing colleagues leave. And so we see, many of our dear friends who have left the profession because they don't want to do bedside nursing anymore.
Right.
We're seeing a lot of our colleagues who are kind of a little bit older, they're retiring earlier than they might have otherwise. And I think everybody's just burned out and frustrated. Where, in not just doctors and nurses, but patients too. They're waiting longer. They're, not getting beds. They're not being seen in an appropriate time, and they're getting less attention from their providers because we're stretched so thin, that they're frustrated, and their frustration comes out to us. So I think it's bad. It's bad. It's rough.
Yeah, absolutely. And were you seeing kind of like a decrease? You were seeing like a decrease in like kind of the stress that everybody was having when the vaccine was first coming out, and now is it kind of due to the Delta variant that you're seeing like that upswing again, like for this month? For
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of both. Yeah, so things really, really peaked and got bad in December and January, and then the vaccine came out, and I think also by that point, I don't, it wasn't purely the vaccine, but, hospitals were so stressed out that they started um, shutting down elective surgeries, and people were doing a lot more social distancing and wearing masks and all that kind of stuff. And people had, been home from school and everything like that, that after mid-January, the numbers started to decline pretty rapidly. And so we actually saw a real low point in the numbers of COVID patients and everything in the spring. And so we were actually kind of a little bit rejoicing, and everybody's kind of happy, like, oh, we're kind of back to normal a little bit. And maybe we attributed some of it to the vaccines, but now it's worse than it ever has been. And yeah, that's probably a large part due to the infectivity and the virulence of the Delta strain, but it's also due to human behaviors. People are going back to schools and gathering more and not masking, and kind of doing all the, and lots of misinformation out there and everything like that. So I think it's a combination of things. It's lack of vaccination, it's this new Delta variant, and it's people's behaviors.
Right, absolutely. And going off of like misinformation, in your experience, do you have like a way that you've seen as like a really good way to kind of fight misinformation, or is it just it's just depending on the okay.
Yeah, I mean, no, I mean, it's so, it's so spread through social media and news outlets and everything like that, that I mean, I can talk to individuals like my patients if they ask me for ivermectin for their COVID. I can talk to them about why that won't work. What do they listen to me? Probably not. Kind of thing. And I think it's important for those of us who have like a social media presence to be vocal about what works and what doesn't work, and to do it in a respectful way and in a way that will hopefully impact people. But I have no idea if it's having any sort of impact whatsoever. I mean, I feel like I'm a voice in a crowd just like everybody else does. So I have no idea how to have an impact on that whatsoever.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, something that I'm like passionate about really is like science communication. And so I'm like kind of trying to work on that. But again, it's like you can't.
That's a great field to be in, is science communication. Obviously, clearly. I mean, who knew
Yeah.
we needed it so badly as of right now? I mean, shit. Once COVID is over, then we'll need it for global warming. I mean, that's going to be the next real big thing.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that I have like one more kind of question for you. Since we've gone over all of this stuff, now I'm just curious about like a fun fact about yourself. If you have like we've already gone over so much, like if your experiences and stuff. But do you have like
fun fact about myself?
Something that like not about, yeah. There's so many things to choose from.
It's a great question. I don't know if the fact, kind of going back to, this desire for different experiences and everything like that. One of my career goals, this is not so much of a fact, but career goal, this is what I'll tell you to answer the question, is at some point, I'm always looking for new experiences, different things to try. At some point, I am going to try to work in the Antarctic. So they have a number of research stations down there, and they have doctors year round. They do these 6-month stints. And so one of my goals is to go down for 6 months to the Antarctic and work in the McMurdo Ice Station. That's kind of in lieu of, I think if I were a younger man and maybe wasn't married or didn't have kids younger, I would probably want to go into space, and I'd be working towards a Mars mission. Mars mission as a doctor. So I'm always like, I want to try something new. And so my goal for something new within the next 5 years or so of my life is to try to go down to the Antarctic and work down there for 6 months. That's my fun fact.
Okay. Wow, that sounds like so awesome. Maybe after you do that, then you can come back on again and tell us about that.
I'll tell you all about the researchers down at the ice station.
Yes, definitely. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me today. I really had a lot of fun with this conversation.
Good. I'm glad. Thank you for having me. And, I hope you keep doing this, and I hope you have a very successful career in science communication, and you strongly advocate for people who can't advocate for themselves.
Yes. Thank you. In the second part of this podcast interview, we discussed that living in different places allowed Dr. Mugel to approach medicine from a different perspective through exposure to the social determinants of health. You have to learn from mistakes and bad outcomes to become a better doctor, listen to feedback, and respond to it. The most important things to do to cope with negative outcomes is to focus on proper sleep hygiene and exercise. Misinformation is spread so quickly through social media and news outlets that combating it has become extremely difficult. It can feel like you are just a voice in a crowd. And lastly, one of Dr. Mugel's career goals is to work in the Antarctic for 6 months. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for future videos. Follow our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for future updates.